Test, test.
If you want to put your headphones on, we're going to start in just a second. You can test your sound.
You tell me when.
Okay. Yep.
Test, test. Can you hear me? Test, test. So we're hearing that there's an echo, Terrence. Yep. Several people. Test, test. Test, test. Do you hear the echo now? No? Okay, great. He's good. Okay, we're going to get started now, so here we go. Terrence, can you put this slide on the screen, please? Okay, so welcome back, everyone, for this session. This is called Pathways to Making Peace with Nature in the Mediterranean, and this is the first panel in that session called Addressing Challenges. So, this panel starts to get at what I was speaking about in the very beginning, about the challenges that we have in the Mediterranean and how we need to identify those solutions. We're going to hear about the Living Mediterranean Report. We're going to hear about the ACCOBAMS Survey Initiative. We'll hear about the MedFund, Forging a Path to the Circular Economy, and the social economic benefits of nature protection. And so for those of you online, including Kate, please note the order of the presentations and stand by, and please be ready on Zoom. And as you're ready on Zoom, please keep yourself on mute until it's time for you to present. All right. Well, now I have the pleasure to invite the panelists that are here in the room to come forward and please have a seat in the front. So please come forward. Let's move this out of the way. Thomas, I'll give you this microphone because you'll be speaking first. So I'm going to introduce each speaker, and I'm going to ask them to give their intervention. And I ask you, the speakers, to please keep strictly to the time. Okay, as the moderator, I'll be reminding you about the time. We need to keep the session as smooth as possible, so try to keep to your time. Thank you. After all of the presenters finish, we'll have time for a discussion. And for those of you online, I don't believe we have a way at the moment to submit questions. So we have people in the room and we'll be asking those people. But please correct me if that issue has been sorted out. Okay. So we'll be taking questions at the very end, and please let us know if who the question is meant for or if it's for the whole panel. And I have to remind you about the COVID protocols. So bear with me. So everyone needs to wear a mask at all times, even the speakers, even me. We have a strict limit on the number of people that can be in this pavilion. The number is 36. During each panel session, Yassine is going to raise his hand so we see where he is. That's Yassine. Yassine is collecting the names and contact details for everyone in the session. This is for contact tracing purposes. Every time we switch to a new panel, I'm going to ask everyone to please leave the pavilion because we have to clean and sanitize it to get ready for the next session. Okay. So I'm going to start, and I have the pleasure to introduce Thomas Galewski, who is a biologist with a PhD in evolutionary biology and ecology. He joined the Tour du Valat Research Institute in 2008 to lead international conservation projects assessing the status of biodiversity in the Mediterranean basin. His current activities include linking scientific research and societal needs in a still insufficiently recognized ecosystem, wetlands. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
You may want to take your headphones off while you're speaking.
All right. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. Yes, just... Okay, so thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present the Living Mediterranean report. So this is a report which was released last June. This is the first report actually to give information on biodiversity trends in the Mediterranean basin for every biomes and for a quite large number of taxonomic groups as well. So this is a collaboration between several high-level conservation and research organizations, including Tour du Valat, where I work, but also IUCN, ZSL, WWF, University of Lisbon, MedFund and MedWet. So this report comes to complement, in a sense, the MEDEC and the RED 2020 report, because it gives a focus on one aspect of the global change, which is biodiversity loss. So we try to go beyond the description of state and trends in biodiversity by giving an assessment as well of threats to species and solutions which have been implemented so far to try to reverse biodiversity decline. Can you hear me? Because my micro... Okay, all right. So, as you all know, the Mediterranean basin is a global hotspot of biodiversity. So it fulfills the main criteria.
You could speak a little louder and closer.
Okay, right. Thank you. It fulfills the main criteria to be a global hotspot because it has a large number of plant species. Just imagine that we have as many species of plants as all sub-Saharan Africa in a much smaller geographical area. This is a major center of species endemism, not only for plants, but also for other taxonomy groups, including arthropods and vertebrates. And it has lost, unfortunately, a majority of its primary vegetation. Only 5% of its vegetation can be considered as original. So we have the three major biomes present in the Mediterranean hotspot, including the marine biome, which is remarkable here because it represents only a small fraction of what you can of the world ocean surface, but holds a significant part of the world's marine fauna and flora. Freshwater ecosystems are remarkable too. They do represent only 2% of the terrestrial surface area of the hotspot, but holds more than 1/3 of all species. And terrestrial ecosystems, as I said earlier, most of them are secondary. They have been perturbed by human activities, but this is a very old relationship between human societies and nature, and in many cases it has resulted in very biodiversity-rich cultural landscapes. So to measure the trend in biodiversity for the region, we use the Living Planet Index. So the Living Planet Index is a single, reliable measure which was developed by the Zoological Society of London and which is used by WWF in its famous report, the Living Planet report, every 2 years. So just to explain you how it works, this is a mean trend in abundance change for vertebrate populations. So basically, you put together every kind of information you have on population counts for vertebrate species, and you calculate one single trend. So for the Mediterranean basin, we use this methodology, and we looked for data for population counts we could find in the scientific journals or in public or private databases. After 18 months of research, we managed to find 80,000 population counts belonging to almost 800 vertebrate species, which is really good because it's almost a bit more than 1/4 of all vertebrate species of the region. So we believe that our index is quite representative of the biodiversity of the region. And the results, unfortunately, are very worrying because we found that the general trend for biodiversity in the Mediterranean basin was declining by 20% between 1993, when we started to calculate our index, and 2016. This means actually that animal population have lost, on average, 1/5 of the population size they had in 1990s. This is a rate of decline which is very fast, actually, very important, comparable to what you can find in tropical ecosystems, just as a matter of comparison. We declinated the index per biome, and we found that there were contrasted trends between marine and freshwater ecosystems, for instance, which were declining fast, compared to the terrestrial ecosystem, where we found a positive trend. So it's good news, we were happy with that, but in the same time, we have to acknowledge that for the terrestrial index, we had much less data than for the other ecosystems, especially from the south and east of the Mediterranean basin, where the pressures to biodiversity are quite high. Another result we had is that systematics and endemism partly explain these diverging trends. For instance, birds are doing much better than fish. We also found a worrying trend for endemic species that were doing worse than non-endemic species. And this is particularly problematic because in the Mediterranean basin, 1/3 of species are endemic to the region. And if we lose them for the entire world. Another source of data we used is the IUCN Red List of threatened species. So everybody knows it, of course, but perhaps you don't know that for the Mediterranean basin, a wonderful work has been done by IUCN Center for Mediterranean Cooperation, which has assessed more than 7,000 species belonging to a diversity of taxonomic groups, vertebrates, of course, but also plants, invertebrates. And the result is that 20% of all species assessed are today threatened with extinction, with higher number of threatened species for freshwater and terrestrial ecosystems. So if we just take the freshwater ecosystems, we have a situation where we have today a decline which is really fast, and in the same time, many species which are already at the verge of extinction. So very problematic situation. So this assessment allows as well to evaluate the direct threats to Mediterranean species. And for marine species, we found that the main threat was overfishing and bycatch. For freshwater species, bad management of water resources. In the Mediterranean, you have a lot of dams which have been built on river basin, and you have also an endemic problem of over-abstraction of water resources, especially for agriculture. For terrestrial species, the main threat was intensive agriculture because it destroys natural and semi-natural habitats species need, but also because it provokes pollution. And in all biomes, we found an importance of climate change and urbanization threats for every biomes. Of course, all these direct threats are actually the consequences of indirect economic and policy drivers, which were very well explained in the presentation earlier this morning. So with this kind of exercise, fortunately, we had some good stories, and we were very happy to see that some species, despite of this bad general situation, were increasing. So when we try to look for why the species were increasing, we found that many of them actually were increasing from past depleted levels, and were increasing thanks to conservation actions. So there is a list of conservation actions you can make, like site protection. If you take, for instance, this loggerhead sea turtle, site protection of the laying sites in Tunisia, in Turkey, in Greece, or in Cyprus allows the population to increase again. Site management, for instance, for the Iberian lynx, site management actions to improve the quality of the habitat has helped the species to recover. Legislation for many waterbird species, like this great egret, hunting ban, which was done by the Bird Directive in like 30 years ago or 40 years ago, has helped species to recover. Harvest management, like for species which are commercially fished, like the bluefin tuna, when quotas were respected, the species has recovered partly. Reintroduction for species which are at the top of the chain, like vultures, like this lammergeier. If you help it to recover its past area range, you can really save it from the extinction. And awareness raising, like for instance species which are at the heart of a conflict between humans and nature, this one because there is conflict with fishermen. Well, by awareness raising actions, you can try to allow the species to cohabitate with humans. And it is the case in Greece, where the species is slightly recovering. But this is not enough, really. Our results are very clear. The solutions we have implemented so far are still too limited to prevent the general decline of biodiversity. Declines, overweight, recoveries. So this is problematic here because we are losing endemic, charismatic, rare species. And if we lose them, as I said earlier, we lose them forever. But in the same time, and perhaps it's even more worrying, we are starting to lose keystone species, which are really helping the ecosystem to functionate. Like for instance, just one example, the European rabbit. Everybody knows it. The European rabbit has been introduced everywhere in the world. It is even a pest in Australia or New Zealand. And at the same time, in its native area range, which is Portugal, Spain, and southern France, the species is disappearing, and even at the stage that it is endangered today. So, all these results advocate, I guess, for urgent actions for the Mediterranean biodiversity. So with my collaborators, we gave a non-exhaustive list of actions that could be done at the top level, like the extension, financing, and better management of protected areas, mainstreaming biodiversity conservation in economic sector, which are today impacting biodiversity, like agriculture, industry, energy, tourism. In the Mediterranean, tourism is an important factor as well. Manage sustainably our natural resources. Just one example, water. Water is going to be more scarce with climate change, and we need to keep some for the environment. Preserve our cultural landscapes. We were lucky enough to be able to have landscapes which were generating benefit for humans and for nature, and we are losing this heritage because we are shifting to a model which is like agro-industrial landscape. And financing biodiversity monitoring, because as you can see, these kind of studies are can say important things for decision makers and for the general public, and it's because they are people who are able to monitor this biodiversity. So keep it like that and even increase it. So you can have more details on the Living Mediterranean report you can download on Tour du Valat website. I thank again my scientific and financial partners, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thanks so much for that sobering presentation. If you can hand the microphone next. Okay. Now I have the pleasure to introduce Simone Panigada, who is the chair of the Scientific Committee of ACCOBAMS and president of the Tethys Research Institute, a member of the Scientific and Technical Committee of the Pelagos Sanctuary, and the Italian delegation to the Scientific Committee of the IWC, the IUCN Cetacean Specialist Group, and the IUCN Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force. He holds a degree in biological sciences and a PhD in environmental biology. Since 1992, he has been involved in research and conservation of cetaceans. Lastly, he is the scientific coordinator of the ACCOBAMS Survey Initiative that he will tell you more about in his presentation. Over to you, Simone.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Way too many membership in my presentation. Anyway, good morning, everyone. I'm going to speak about this major scale event, the so-called ACCOBAMS Survey Initiative, which was conducted over the last few years, thanks to the generous contribution of several funders. I see some of them here in this room, and I would like to thank them deeply. I have been working with Julie Belmont, who has really helped me preparing this presentation. And of course, the whole ACCOBAMS secretariat has been crucial in this. Why do we monitor marine megafauna? Because we want to assess, estimate, and abundance, and we want to have robust data which will allow us to continue doing this over time. And we work in the Mediterranean and in the Black Sea, which is the ACCOBAMS region. It's not an easy playground, as you may imagine. Cetaceans are highly mobile species, sometimes very hard to find. You have to face with bad weather, you have to face with a lot of constraints. It requires scientific national monitoring capacities and means, and they have to be systematic and shared protocols. Otherwise, you start collecting data and then you find out that you are comparing pears with apples, which in science doesn't really work very well. And the Mediterranean is a challenging region. We have several countries, we have several cultures, we have several religions, we have several customs. I can tell you, it's not an easy place to organize a survey like the ACCOBAMS survey initiative. So only if we can work in a harmonized, systematic and collaborative effort, we can work and we can ensure that effective monitoring will lead to conservation actions. So the ACCOBAMS survey initiative, with some numbers, it's a 3-year project, more than 50 partners, more than 20 countries involved. More than 100 scientists have been participating. We were flying 8 planes at the same time, 6 research vessels. The surface we covered was almost 2 million square kilometers. And the effort we have covered is more than 55,000 kilometers. This is almost 1.5 times the length of the equator, to give you a mean of understanding. And of course, a strong and motivated international team has facilitated this and has allowed to overcome the countless challenges, and I really mean countless. So this is the study area that we have been focusing on, the whole Mediterranean Sea. We divided this into several blocks. Here you see the tracks of the aerial surveys, the 8 planes I described earlier. You see some areas are not shaded. In this situation, we were not allowed to fly because we did not receive flight permits from countries. But we overcame this by using a vessel to cover these areas. And these are the areas that were covered by vessels. So the survey was jointly aerial and vessel-based to address different questions and to guarantee the widest coverage of our study area. A similar effort was conducted a year after, with funding coming from the European Commission in the Black Sea. And these are the areas that have been covered, going from the northeast, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Georgia, and a little bit of Russia. The bigger area which was not covered was because Russia did not allow us to fly or to operate any vessel in their economic exclusive zone, so we were not able to collect data in that specific area. The results are publicly available, as well as the data, online at the ACCOBAMS webpage, and you can find the 2 technical and analytical reports, which are fairly consistent, very thick, and present all the information that I will not have time to go through during my quick presentation. We were looking at estimating abundance and density. We wanted to know how many animals are there, so that in 10 years, in 5 years, we can do a similar effort and we can see whether the conservation measures we are applying are working or not. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of numbers. We estimated 1,700 fin whales with a coefficient of variation of 28%. And this is how the fin whales are distributed and how they use the Mediterranean Sea. You can see there is a marked preference for the central, north and western portion of the ocean. Estimated almost 500,000 striped dolphins with a CV of 14%, which is very precise. Lots of sightings. Here you can see the different distribution density of striped dolphins throughout the Mediterranean Sea. again, there is a marked preference for the western basin compared to the eastern basin, which tend to be lower in abundance and density for most of the species. Not only cetaceans, we were working also on a commercial species. This is a swordfish, and we estimated about 20,000 of these within the Mediterranean Sea. And here you can see how the sightings and the density maps are distributed throughout the Mediterranean Sea. Earlier on today, we discussed about marine debris, plastic over the ocean. This is the most present item we have been collected. We collected more than 41,000 sightings of plastic debris, and we're flying on a plane going at 200 kilometers per hour. So you can imagine how many plastic we are missing by looking. So we estimated that we could consider the overall number of plastic of sizes more than 30 centimeters, which is what we could see from the plane, over 3 million. And if we adapt this to smaller size, we can think that there are about 11.5 million of plastic debris in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is pretty much an underestimate, because we are sure that we don't see all of them from the plane. We are looking for cetaceans mainly, so we don't want to be distracted by the huge amount of plastic we can see during our plans. We didn't invent the wheel. The wheel has been invented before, and so we try to adapt this to the Mediterranean situation. And we were looking at previous large-scale surveys, such as scans estimating small cetaceans in European Atlantic waters and the North Sea. Here you can see there has been one in 1994, one in 2005, and one in 2016. It's not the ideal 6-year framework we are aiming, but it allows to provide trends in abundance and estimate over time and see whether the mitigation measures and the conservation measures we are applying are working or not, which is the final goal. Similar effort has been carried out by France in SAM and Renoux project. Here you can see some of them in Atlantic side of France, and on the right hand side you see in the French territories how France has been extremely busy in organizing and running these large-scale surveys over time as well. A survey like this has multiple benefits, as you can imagine. It's not easy to summarize all of them. I'm just going to bring some food for thoughts on the table, and you can find more details in the report. First of all, the ACCOBAMS survey initiative and similar effort greatly expands our knowledge on distribution, density, and abundance on the target species. You can work on cetaceans, you can work on birds, fish, sharks, manta rays, pretty much everything that you see at the surface is studiable by our projects. It enables anthropogenic stressors such as ship strikes, fisheries bycatch, and other like marine debris, which is one of the main one in the Mediterranean, to be placed in a population context. How are these threats affecting the population? You can assess this only if you have precise and robust numbers of how many animals are there. It provides comparable results since the data are collected with a systematic effort at a variety of scales, from local to global, and this allows us to see, in a specific area or in a specific MPA, conservation measures are working more or less. It provides a strong basis for assessment of conservation status in the long term. IUCN Red List, it was mentioned by my colleague earlier on. Thanks to the data collected by ACCOBAMS, we have reassessed all the marine mammals in the Black Sea and in the Mediterranean with new evidence. So we were able to update the Red List status of cetaceans in the Mediterranean Sea, and also can feed information into conservation and management plans, for example, which are crucial for these species. It contributes to place-based conservation effort. There has been a lot of work on cetaceans' critical habitats under the ACCOBAMS framework, and IMAS, or important marine mammal areas, under the framework of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas. And so this is certainly the right framework where we can discuss about IMAS. And we will be talking about this on Monday as well in the same meeting room. It facilitates training and capacity building throughout the entire area. This was a very important component of the ACCOBAMS survey initiative. We try to explain how to use this methodology throughout all the countries in the Mediterranean Sea so that they can replicate the effort at a smaller scale on their own, on a more systematic basis. And also it sets the basis to evaluate trends in density and abundance over time and space at the appropriate management scales. Thanks to this, we will be able to evaluate our measures and our conservation measures over time and see how they are working. What's happening next? The ACCOBAMS long-term monitoring program. It's an idea that aims to ensure the sustainability of harmonized effort to estimate abundance and density of cetacean population in the ACCOBAMS area through shared protocols, trained observers, collaborative approach in data analysis, ideal, as I mentioned, 6-year interval to meet international requirements, and a synergy with ongoing programs. The Marine Strategy Framework Directive in Europe is a simple one, and the ecosystem approach under the Barcelona Convention framework is also the most obvious one. Of course, this requires a lot of funding, which has to be taken into consideration because it's usually the limiting factor in science and conservation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simone. Okay, Romain is next. So I have the pleasure to now introduce, I don't know if you want to try to manage this. You can find it in here.
Yep.
I now have the pleasure to introduce Romain Renoux, who is the Executive Director of the MedFund, a conservation trust fund dedicated to marine protected areas in the Mediterranean. Prior to this position, he was a marine protected area manager in the Caribbean and the president of the French Marine Protected Areas Managers Network. So over to you, Romain.
Thank you, Charles. I have a question for you. Can I speak French or I have to speak in English?
This is all in English.
All in English. Okay,
Yep.
Let's go in English. Okay, so sorry. So thank you for the invitation. And thank you very much, Thomas and Simone, to set the stage. And we saw that the trends, but we all know that, right? The trends are not good. But hopefully, I have a good news today. Science shows that marine protected areas are working. They are working when they have sufficient human and financial resources. And when I say they are working, they are effective in protecting biodiversity. It means more fish, diverse fish, bigger fish. It means regulation of climate change. It means contribution to blue economy. And it means also the governance at sea and the shared governance. So science says MPAs do work, but they do work if they have sufficient funds. And this is the reason why here in Marseille, a few years ago, when it was the International Congress on Marine Protected Areas were organized here in 2013, and 3 countries, France, Monaco, and Tunisia, have decided to launch an initiative to set up a sustainable financial mechanism to support marine protected area management. And this initiative has been structured in the past years, and it is now a conservation trust fund named the MedFund, which is completely operational to support marine protected areas across the Mediterranean region. And this MedFund is a very unique organization with a very innovative governance, gathering at the same time member countries from the Mediterranean Sea. I talk about the 3 funders. We have also Spain, Albania, and Morocco on board with us, but also NGOs and regional organizations from all across the Mediterranean region. And we have now built an alliance of financial partners You can see the logo here, the JEF, AFD, FFEM, the Fondation Prince Albert de Monaco, and many others. And what we are doing exactly is that we support the day-to-day management cost of marine protected areas in the Mediterranean region. You will see in this map, we are now supporting up to 3,000 square kilometers of MPAs in the Mediterranean region. So it goes from Kuryat Island in Tunisia, and we have some managers of Kuryat Island here today with us, to Albania, the Karaburun Sazan Marine Park, to the Alosema National Park, or again, I would say the Gokova Bay in Turkey that we do support. What we fund, I was saying, the management day-to-day activities. So what it is exactly is the scientific monitoring, it's the governance, it's the maintenance of the equipment. I mean, managers of MPA, we all know that we need a boat to go to do the surveillance or to go on the sea to do the monitoring. But the thing is that the boat needs to be repaired, the boat needs fuel and so on. So those little things makes a lot difference between a paper park and an effective marine protected areas. So this is the core of our mission. And the objective that we have is to support 20 marine protected areas by 2025. So we hope we'll be able to gather more partners, more technical and more financial partners on board with us in order to reach this goal. And there is also one thing I want to highlight here in the way we are working in the region. You said, Thomas, that conservation measures, they do work, and that when it's effective on the ground. And what we have found is that the co-management of marine protected areas, it's something very effective in the countries we are operating. When I say co-management, it's when you have local NGOs working hand by hand with a national authority. Could be a national agency or could be a ministry. Because the NGO, they have the agility, the ability to go on the ground. Most of them are located close to these marine protected areas. And the national authority gave, I would say, the national context, the national framework and the power to support those NGOs. So this is the way we are working in the Mediterranean, is that we have three-party agreement. When we sign an agreement, it's a 5 years agreement, because we believe that below 5 years, you don't have conservation outputs. I mean, it takes time to restore biodiversity. It takes time to protect biodiversity. It takes 1 minute or 5 minutes to destroy it, but it takes years to restore it. So this is the reason why this is a long-term financing mechanism. So the MPAs we are supporting, they will be supported for years. And we will be monitoring, and I think that was a very good point that you made, Simone, is really to make sure that the marine protected area manager, they have the technical, let's say, ability, but they do have also the financial capacity to really monitor biodiversity. Because when it comes to marine biodiversity, we all know that it's quite expensive. And so we have to support and to help those managers to be able to implement those monitoring, not once every 10 years, but once every year, just to make sure that we monitor the effectiveness of those protected areas. And I have a short video to show you, because I'm so sad that some of our grantees couldn't come here in Marseille. So we made short videos. I hope it will work. Let me try this. I don't know if you can see it. Okay. Do they hear the sound? Do they hear the sound?
veprimtari ekonomike. Por në fakt, një nga sfidat më të mëdha në menaxhimin e parkut detar ka qenë ndryshimi i këtij mentaliteti dhe krijimi i një qasje të re, në të cilën komuniteti bashkë administratën i konsiderojnë si bashkë menaxhues së kësaj pasurie natyrore. Sfida e dytë, padyshim, ka të bëjë me mënyrën e aksesimit dhe të patrullimit të zonës, duke qenë që është një nga parqet me sipërfaqe relativisht shumë të madhe dhe i shtrirë gjeografikisht, që do të thotë është shumë e vështirë për administratën për ta aksesuar dhe për ta patrulluar në mënyrë konstante këtë sipërfaqe. Padyshim që një nga sfidat e rëndësishme ngelet dhe pjesa aspekti financiar, qëndrueshmëria financiare, e cila është drejt për drejt e lidhur me menaxhimin dhe me eficiencën në veprimtaritë menaxhuese që ne ushtrojmë në këtë zonë. Mbështetja MedFund tregoi që bashkë menaxhimi dhe partneriteti midis autoritetit publik dhe atij jo fitimprues është një kombinim dhe një model bashkëmenaxhimi shumë i suksesshëm, i cili mund të çojë përpara dhe të sigurojë menaxhimin efektiv të një zone të mbrojtur. Kështu që do thoja padyshim kjo formë bashkëqeverisje e këtij parku detar do të jetë një model që do të shërbejë dhe do të implementohet edhe në zonat e tjera detare në këtë territor.
Simone Panigada. Je suis directeur de gestion des écosystèmes littoraux à la PAL, Agence de protection et d'aménagement du littoral, sous tutelle du ministère de l'Environnement. Pour la Tunisie, la contribution du MedFund s'articule autour de la mise en place d'un mode de gestion nouveau en Tunisie. Au niveau des textes juridiques, on peut le trouver, mais sur le terrain, ça n'a pratiquement pas été appliqué que via les financements assurés par le MedFund. Et cette expérience-là, c'est l'expérience de co-gestion. Ça permet, on va dire, une complémentarité entre le tissu associatif et le tissu administratif qui a donné de très très bons résultats et qui a permis une réussite d'échelle méditerranéenne. La différenciation que nous ramène le MedFund, elle est très très importante pour nos sites. En effet, le MedFund nous permet de sortir de cette stratégie de projet. C'est-à-dire que pour la gestion de nos sites, on ne se dit plus que le projet va se terminer, qu'on n'aura plus la possibilité d'y accéder, de continuer les activités. Non, le MedFund est là pour nous permettre de continuer nos activités, même si on n'a pas les financements sur un projet X.
Thank you very much. So I think that we had other, let's say, testimonies from the field, but we have to stop now. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Do you hear me? Yes? Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity, and you can join us on our website to know more about the MedFund. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much, Romain. Thank you. And Terence, I don't know if you can detect there's a strong echo. So we hope to address that. How are you guys doing up here in the panel? It's kind of hot. So feel free to get up and get your drink of water or whatever you need, please. Huh? The echo is still there and it's very bad. No. Is it better for anyone here? Is it bad? Yes? Yes. Yes, she says it's bad. Okay, test. Test. Bad, yes. Bad. He says bad. Still bad. Okay.
Hello.
Can you... Okay, test, test. Test, test. Is that better now? Okay. You press the magic button, Terrence. Good. All right, so I'm going to introduce you now. Now I would like to introduce Hussam Hawwa, Difaf CEO. Difaf's goal is to support and engage in projects that drive the conservation, restoration, and protection of water and environmental systems that nurture our survival and development now and in the future. So over to you, Hussam.
Thank you, sir. Is my voice okay? Yeah? Can you hear me well?
Yes, but you'll have to hold it
take
very
this off?
close. No, you have to wear the mask, though. But hold this very close.
Yeah. So, thank you for having me. Honored to be here. Difaf is an environmental engineering and solution provider company. We work on the sectors of water, agriculture, and wastewater because they're the most impactful sectors that usually harm the environment. Of course, energy is also a cross-cutting point. There's also the focus on the nexus and circular approach in our solution provision. And what does Chinese mean? We were going to find out in a bit. One time we were walking on this river, and this is one of our tributaries in Lebanon. And I would like to show you like what happened about 1 kilometer downstream when this tributary entered the main river. And this is our national pride. It's the biggest river we have in Lebanon. So this is a short video to show you what we saw. This is not a mine, and this is not a something weird. It's actually a biological reaction, and we later found out that it's anaerobic conditions that actually were sedimentation because of all the pollution that's in the river is actually building up and then coming up to the surface and exploding on the surface of the river. So this is basically quite a dead river. And to kind of recover that is a big challenge. And this is the point where I decided to create Difaf and to work on this aspect. So enough of this. Next, basically in Lebanon we have 8% of our, magnificent 8% of our wastewater is treated. From the 260 million cubic meters, we have 60% that are connected to sewer systems and 40 not connected at all. 60 of these have no treatment at all. 10% is functioning wastewater treatment plants and 30 non-functional. From these 30 non-functional, 10% non-functional, you have 30% that are discharged only in primary treatment. So you can imagine what's happening in that river. Also industrial wastewater, we have 60 million cubic meters per year. Most of them are actually not connected, either directly going into the river or into the environment. And this was before the economic crisis which we are facing now. So you can imagine what's happening with the treatment plants and all the disaster at this point. UNICEF is actually warning of a looming water crisis in Lebanon. But not to get too dramatic now. Some of our projects in Sufa, we are doing public schools, water audits, turning public schools into green schools. Aquacycle, we're doing a 3-stage nature-based water treatment system. Dams assessment, we are actually gonna talk about this now, is the linear thinking and technocratic thinking in dams designs. And in SuperMed, we are doing water efficient irrigation for a decision support system. We're doing the socioeconomic study there. And with CEPF BirdLife, we're scanning the upper Damour River, which was never scanned, for biodiversity assessment. And we're going to link that with water quality assessment. In that walk, because we're doing drone and river walking, because we believe like we have to have both assessment scope in scoping mission, we actually found out that there is a native fish that was already considered extinct, And the farmer said like he's actually getting this fish and he's eating it, although now it's almost non-existent. And he said to me something very beautiful and romantic, which always reminded me like of a Native American story where the Native Americans used to keep the small fish in the river, and if anyone took the small fish, they would actually punish him in the tribal sense. And he actually told me they did the same thing, which was like not too long ago. But this knowledge is now extinct. So going back to our subject, this is a caricature that shows us actually a combination of the curses that we live today. After we cut and we clear and we do everything, we put a technocratic, let's say, a technical linear solution, which is a fan. And also, we don't recognize that this fan also generates heat, right? And then we ask why it's so hot, and yeah, I think it summarizes a lot. And this is what brings us to the circular economy concept. For human history, we lived in sustainability with harmony in nature. Industrialization catalyzed the economy and took us to a take, make, dispose culture. And the extreme weather conditions, we see that as a part of the climate change, but they're actually not a cause of climate change, they actually are climate change. And this calls for transition from our current unsustainable linear economy to a more circular economy. And this is where I want to link with circular system thinking. So basically, we can't just look at the circular economy as a circle. It's actually a circular thinking about things. Generate of income, of course, means cleaner production, better service. When we do reduce resource dependency, when we minimize waste, we go through recycling. And I mean, this is a typical circular model, but is it enough is a big question. I don't know if you saw this, but this is in UK, and this is actually an example or analogy of how when we use a resource, the question is which of these systems, if we have the same exact size, which of them uses more bricks? And of course, actually, we would think it's the serpentine wall, but that's actually the bigger wall because the linear wall is thicker. And if we go back to these old methods of doing designs of the wall, we're actually having more stability than the linear wall. So this says like how our linear thinking is also being translated into our technologies and our everyday life. If we go back to Lebanon, really like we have a national water strategy that's basically about only doing dams and nothing else. Everything else is about like just wishy-washy little small things, but the focus is on dams, and all the world is going against dams. And actually, we don't have many dams, so Lebanon is now having a chance to really go more green, and because it is now in an economic crisis, so this is actually, we can turn it into our fall into a benefit. So it's a good time to think about why dams are really dangerous. And we believe that, I mean, dams is a purely linear technocratic approach because we say, okay, we need water, we don't have water here, okay, so we put a dam to give water for there. But we forget all the externalities that comes with that. We have bottling companies in Lebanon that bottle water, so people are dissociated from their water sources. They don't know where the water is coming from. They just drink bottled water. And of course, we have the pollution to the sea, because I'm also trying to link all this to the sea, because it's also about the marine ecosystems in these sessions. So I would like to show you a small video, which also can get this picture out. Sorry.
When we think about climate change, we tend to think about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere warming the planet. Carbon is so central to our thinking about the climate that many other important aspects are excluded from the conversation. One of these things is water. Water is actually the dominant greenhouse gas, but its global effects are difficult to measure because it doesn't spread out evenly in the atmosphere like carbon does. Its effect on temperature also depends on the many forms it takes. When it takes the form of a haze, it has a warming effect. When it takes the form of clouds, it has a cooling effect, except for at night. in which it has a subtle warming effect. Since atmospheric water is hard to model, it tends to get ignored. But temperature is not the only important aspect of the climate here. If the climate can be warm or cold, the climate can also be wet or dry. The rampant rise of floods and droughts of our time are said to be caused by climate change, but really they are climate change. While temperature does have some effect on rainfall, floods and droughts are primarily caused by disruptions to the hydrological cycle. We tend to think of the water cycle this way. Rain falls, water evaporates, condenses into clouds, and repeats. But this is only part of the picture, since a lot more happens underground. Healthy soil is like a sponge that soaks up a lot of water. Some of it is taken up and stored by plants, and some of it percolates deep down into aquifers. This groundwater wells up and feeds springs and streams, which allows even more life to thrive. There's then much more water to evaporate from the saturated ground or to transpire through plants. This abundance of water vapor allows for more consistent rainfall. So what happens if we cut down the forest, plow the grasslands, and expose the soil? Without trees or plants to buffer the rain, the heavy downpour compacts the soil. The water can't soak down into the compacted ground, so almost all of it stays above ground and we have a flood. Almost all this water runs off, carrying loads of topsoil with it. And when the rain stops, the little water there is left evaporates very quickly, leaving the ground compact and dry. This lack of percolation depletes the groundwater over time, so it can't feed the streams, which dry up. Now there's no water in the land to feed rain clouds, and we have a drought. If a rainstorm does come, it just creates another flood and worsens the subsequent drought. Instead of consistent rainfall, we have a flood-drought cycle. Fortunately, it is possible to reverse this trend. There are ways to regenerate ecosystems and restore the water cycle pretty rapidly while feeding people in the process. Making subtle changes to the land's topography can slow the flow of water, allowing more of it to soak into the ground and be used by plants. Plants with deep roots help break up the compacted soil, allowing water to percolate deeper. Everyone has a place in reversing the climate crisis. Whether you're working to protect healthy ecosystems, regenerate damaged ones, or just helping yourself or your neighbor depend a little less on industrial agriculture, you are helping the earth heal.
So basically, I wanted to show this video to show the linkages between the different systems. Basically, we have also carbon cycle, which you know about, of course, but we have also underground systems. And we have, for example, fungi, which we never talk about too much, that generate 85 gigatons of CO2 annually. So if you want to do something about maybe CO2, maybe you can eat mushrooms. So we cannot solve the problems with the same thinking that we used to create them. This was by Albert Einstein. Exploitation of our resources are the result of linear thinking and now outdated simplistic economic models. Problems created by linear thought cannot be solved with solutions created by the same line of thought. For example, in cities, we just don't look at treatment plants. We look at also circular models within the cities where also the heat is actually part of this calculations. With agriculture, we don't just look at, okay, we have a plant that produces methane, but actually we have to think of how to link this with actually reusing this energy in the agriculture sector. Monocultural farms can actually be, we see it as linear, but actually structurally we have agroecology, which is coming up, and it's actually more circular farms where you have much more efficient farming systems in terms of energy and food production. In wastewater, I'm going to go very fast. Basically, of course, we have biogas. But now the thing of talking about scale is very important. We can go decentralized because at small scales, we don't have to have a lot of very big engineering projects. In wastewater, we have constructed wetlands, for example, RBCs, ABRs, anaerobic buffer reactors, biogas, or hybrids of these. Which we actually can rely on. I'm gonna go fast. So circular economies keep products and materials in use, regenerate natural resources, drastically reduce waste and pollution, and increase economic value. However, we must think on several scales and inside the systems and subsystems. This is a very important report. I advise you all to look at it. It's called the Circulatory Gap Report. I'm not going to go through the key messages because I'm out of time. I'm just going to show you some of the initiatives that we have in Lebanon. Beritech and AgriTech, they work on incubation of small, medium enterprises. CWAS also, entrepreneurship on green entrepreneurship level. WEFRA is a research-based initiative. Waterlution is also about water. Fast Forward is about SDGs. All of these are encouraging small businesses to rise up and green businesses to rise up. Very quickly, we have some, for example, these guys are using iron oxide nanoparticles. I'm just putting some out. Smart water village, using all kinds of monitoring systems to monitor a city. Hydrocrop they're using, it's a platform to connect farmers, researchers, and authorities. Robotics, Luxeed Robotics is the first to develop chemical-free weeding robot. We have also sustainable fashion branding, Compost Baladi, which uses small composting mechanisms for different clients. Zuwabati uses black soldier fly. All of these green initiatives are coming up in Lebanon. Bio-waste. We also developed like an innovation for daily wastewater from farmers. Anyways, I think I'm out of time. Thank you all. Thank you all for action.
Thank you so much for the very interesting presentation, Hussam. Great. Well, the next speaker is Kate Hogg. And Kate, are you there?
Yes,
Can we
I'm here.
test your audio right now, please? And can
Yep.
you switch
Can you hear
over,
me?
please, Terrence, to the video?
Can you hear me and see my screen?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the panel, please find a seat so you can see Kate. Okay, Kate, we can see you. Can we hear you? Can you speak?
Hello, good morning, everybody.
No, we're not hearing you. Just bear with us here. Okay, I think we can hear you now.
Test.
Yes,
Can you
perfect.
hear me now?
Okay, great. So I'm going to introduce you.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for bearing with us here. We're a little bit over time. This is Kate Hogg. She's an experienced marine conservation consultant, freelance writer, editor, and proofreader, specializing in natural resource management, governance, and environmental and sustainable development issues. She spent over 10 years working in the NGO and academic sectors in different parts of the world, striving to create a sustainable future for local fishing communities. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to this session today. So I'm going to be talking to you about the socio-economic benefits of nature, particularly in marine protected areas, and actually more about how we talk about the socio-economic benefits of marine protected areas. So I think that we can all agree, and after Romain's wonderful talk, that what's pertinently clear is that we need well-managed, well-located, highly protected and well-funded marine protected areas that really work. But how do we judge or know if an MPA is really working or if it's successful or not? Should we really focus on the purpose of the MPA, or should we focus on the performance of the MPA to measure its success? And does how we view success make a difference to our levels of support? So in general, we tend to focus on the conservation purpose of MPAs and in turn focus by default on ecological measurement. We often look at levels of abundance, size and biomass, and then diversity of species to report on whether or not our MPAs are successful. We might also focus on how MPAs can provide improvements to ecosystem health, helping to adapt to climate change impacts, including ocean acidification, sea level rise, storm intensification, and shifts in species distributions, leading to climate invaders. And we may or may not decide whether or not we want to share these findings with the communities where our MPAs are located. But when we measure these ecological benefits, we're only measuring a very narrow suite of indicators that mostly look at the recovery of commercially valuable fish and invertebrates. We're only focusing on the extractive value. And we often fail to mention that there are actually numerous challenges associated with gathering accurate results for the ecological measurements. For example, fishing displacement, among many other factors, can lead to either an overestimation or an underestimation of recovery. And this narrow focus often misses a really crucial part of MPAs, that they are in fact a social construct. And so there is a human dimension and all those massive associated complexities that we have to consider. Of course, there's no denying that there are numerous potential social and economic benefits that stem from MPAs. Often, when we consider what economic factors to measure, we focus on market benefits and give our attention to three main beneficiaries: businesses, so primarily those related to fisheries and tourism, so consumers who purchase products and services that depend to some extent on marine protected areas, and then on local communities. And this is often represented by government, who can indirectly or indirectly benefit from the generation of jobs and the payment of additional fees and taxes, for example, that could come from international tourists. But is the story really that simple? And are we all judging and importantly experiencing an MPA success in the same way? The answer is, of course, no. And this is where, for me, things get really interesting. We continue to sell marine protected areas to communities using the same old win-win discourse, promising that marine protected areas can both protect biodiversity on the one hand and then lead to economic benefits for the affected communities on the other hand. But by doing this, although we can generate some interest and maybe that interest lasts for a little while, we can actually build up expectations and raise hopes for fisheries and tourism benefits. Then when the MPA doesn't deliver what has promised, as sadly many of them don't, this can have very negative effects on attitudes and compliance that are very difficult to reverse. I think Romain said something very interesting in his presentation, where obviously we can spend years and years trying to protect something, and then it takes 1 minute for us to destroy it. And from the social perspective, the same is true of people's support for an MPA. So it can take years and years to build up that trust with the community, but then it can take a very short amount of time to destroy that trust. And then sometimes that's irreversible. What we have to understand is that not everybody within a community will win because of an MPA. And what's fundamental for us to realize is that not all the actors and sectors of the community will be able to exploit the opportunities that we promise them if they actually happen, or will benefit in the same way. And this can have really big social problems within the community, causing social stratification. And that can have a really big effect on how people view MPAs and then in turn on their support. So how can support towards MPAs be strengthened? Despite most actors identifying the purpose of an MPA to be aiming at some kind of biological conservation objective, so when you ask them what's an MPA for, they will tell you to protect fish. But in fact, the majority of actors focus on socioeconomic factors to judge whether or not that MPA is a success. But they don't use the standard socioeconomic good practice guideline indicators that we find in all of our lovely academic and non-academic resources. They do use a very different and are interested in a much wider and varied suite of indicators. So perhaps the answer to increase our support towards marine protected areas may be to focus our attention on a wider range of MPA benefits beyond those commonly cited in the win-win discourse. and to consider the views that are formed about what MPAs are and what they represent in the different communities affected by them. There should be greater focus on other indirect benefits related to the existence and the bequest values of an MPA, which have been identified as being important factors influencing attitudes and actions towards marine protected areas. Going one step further, it's strongly recommended that the different actors work together to create a list of indicators which are of interest and of relevance to them, and that they deem to be a measure of whether or not their MPA is a success. So I think Romain touched on another really interesting point, that we have to promote co-management. He suggested, well, that's true, that co-management can be between NGOs and government. But then we also have to include the local actors in our co-management process. And increasing these participatory activities where the different actors, the local fishermen, the local community, are involved in devising their own indicators could be a great step towards promoting support for an MPA. So community support may be maintained over longer periods of time when focusing on more collective values and striving for a better future than one without a marine protected area. Describing projects and policy as win-win is a really common practice, yet it's not really broad enough in its view of the multi-dynamics and the complexity of most conservation and development scenarios. The reality is, sadly, there is no win-win scenario. When we designate marine protected areas, we create a really complex system of trade-offs where some people will win and some people might lose. And I think that the key is that we must have really honest and open conversations about this. Actually, often we don't know what the outcomes are going to be, and we won't know who's going to win and who's going to lose. But that devising shared indicators by which to measure success could go a long way in promoting our long-term and much-needed support for marine conservation. If we maintain the win-win, we are more likely to create a backlash against conservation, which really is the last thing that our oceans need. So that's the end of my presentation today. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kate. Let's give her a round of applause. And can I please have the panelists to come back? Romain and Simone, and please. So it's time for a discussion. So if you have a question for any of the panelists, you have a question, sir? Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Je peux parler français ou bien je dois parler anglais? English, yes. Excuse me, normally I must have been with you from the beginning, but I'm not informed about this schedule of time. The only thing is that I have to highlight that MedFund is acting exactly towards the objectives that we are working on for Mediterranean. MedFund, which is created by France, Monaco and Tunisia, is working for all Mediterranean protected areas. And its action is very interesting, but we need large support for MedFund and other associations or organizations or countries in order to go that way. It's the key of success for this Mediterranean solution. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that intervention. Is there any other you want to respond, please, Romain? Hang on, the microphone is off. There's a little button on the bottom. This one. Can you hold that in?
Does it work?
No, hold it in for a second and look for the light.
Okay.
There we go.
Does it work? Yeah, it works. Thanks. No, I was just introducing Mr. Chebili because he's a representative from the Ministry of Environment of Tunisia. So I'm very glad that he could join us. And he's also a very active board member of the MedFund. So just to introduce and thank you for your support.
Great, thank you and welcome. Is there any other questions for any of the panelists? Please. Yeah, well, there is another question. Here,
If there is no other questions, I will ask a question to Mr. Hussam about composting. As you know, Mediterranean region is a hotspot of climate change, and this hotspot needs a new comportement, a new behavior for working our soils. Our soils are getting very, very poor. And you have spoken about composting, and this compost will be a solution for amendment of soil. Please, more information about this action.
Thank you, sir. Basically, composting now is a rising technology in Lebanon. It goes from very basic to some small industrial scale. We actually have a farmer who is doing vermicomposting, which is using worms also to eradicate solid waste, organic solid waste, and he's producing excellent fertilizer with that. So the beauty about composting is that it has a two-way byproduct that can be very useful. If you do vermicomposting, you have worms and you have also like the fertilizer from the other. At the same time, you also have the decrease of solid waste, which you don't need to landfill. Lebanon is a small country which has no areas, basically. Everyone is going not in my backyard model. But with such technology, we have very little, actually in rural areas, we have almost 70% of the waste is organic. So we don't have a lot of solid waste that is not degradable. Compost Balad is actually providing a service for anyone who provides them with the waste, is that they go and pick it up from them. So they collaborate with farmers to go to their places, they collect everything, and they go and they compost them either on site or somewhere else. So they network between the different farmers and they make this kind of model which is rotational and they're actually benefiting others. Definitely black soldier fly is actually a very interesting technology. This fly can eat twice its own weight. Like for example, if you're a human, let's say you are 50 kilos, you imagine you're eating 100 kilos of food every day. This is how ferocious it is. It can eat a lot of waste in no time. Basically, if you produce 1 kilo, you can produce larvae with it, so you can do, it's a very important protein food for fish, and it's of course organic and healthy. At the same time, it can produce fertilizer, so it eats the food, it produces fertilizer. At the same time, you can use the larvae, which is a very expensive feed for chicken and fish.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? Yeah, Robert finally remembered his question.
Terribly sorry, Robert Metman. I just want to check if I got it wrong. It's for Kate. Did you say that we don't necessarily seek for a win-win situation, or I got it wrong?
No, I mean, ideally, we want the win-win scenario. The fact is that the win-win scenario doesn't often happen, and it doesn't often happen the way that we promise it to happen. And so I think the point that I want to make is that we have to change the focus of how we share the potential benefits of marine protected areas. I'd be more honest about the fact that we don't necessarily know whether or not the community will benefit or not, because there are a lot of factors that have to all line up in order for an MPA to be successful and for those economic benefits to happen. And obviously in some cases there are, we promise the fishermen that they're going to be the ones that benefit, but actually the commercially valuable species recover much more slowly, and perhaps other beneficiaries start to happen sooner, and perhaps the dive industry can start thriving before the economic returns come for the fishermen. And so then you get some kinds of inequity and social stratification happening inside communities, and fishermen begin to resent you because you promised them economic benefits and then they don't get them. And so the idea is that if you actually work with communities and ask them how are they going to view whether the MPA is successful or not, then that can be much more valuable than making kind of grandiose promises about things that actually are very, very difficult to promise. And the things that they could decide that they want to measure in terms of success could actually be very varied. Like it could be how much graffiti is put on signs within a marine protected area, or how many signs exist in the first place. And if funding is renewed annually for a marine protected area, if a government changes, do they keep the marine protected area, or do they decide that they aren't interested in protection? And so that's kind of my main point. Obviously, we really want the win-win because we want to protect our oceans. It's just rather how we talk about that with the different actors and the different communities that are going to be impacted that's important.
Great. Thank you so much for grounding us in reality, Kate, with that response. Well, we're going to close out this particular panel now. So if we can all give a round of applause to all of the presenters. They're fantastic presentations. I learned a lot in this session. So thank you so much. And we realize it's a bit warm in here, so thanks for bearing with us and being in the spotlight. Thank you. And thank you all. And Terrence, can you please flash on the screen from my computer, please? So right now, don't look at the screen, but right now, in 5 minutes at the center stage, there's going to be a high-level panel associated with this same topic that we've been talking about here all day. So I invite you to go attend that. We're going to close this pavilion now and clean and sanitize it. We're going to come back at 2 p.m. and I'm going to put the correct slide on the screen. And this is the next session. So we invite you to come back at 2 for the next session, or the next panel in this session, which is Pathways to Making Peace with Nature in the Mediterranean. The second panel is Promising Solutions. So thank you all very much.